Good afternoon. I'm sitting here with Zoraida Cordova at the 2018 Festival of Books. So my first question is, growing up in Hispanic culture, we were always told myths and stories about brujas and Dia de los Muertos. Was any part of your book based on your family heritage?
Well, hi guys. So my book Labyrinth Lost is based on a lot of things that I've wanted to tell for a very long time. I've always wanted to tell a story about a family of brujas, and I think that that was specifically mine because I'd never seen witches that came. I'd never seen brown witches, like witches of color. All of the witchcraft in the world, in mainstream media, comes from Europe, and even though like Latin American culture does have a lot of Spanish influence, it's still not the same thing. And so a lot of the superstitions that we grew up with, like I don't know if you guys or if like you have similar experiences, like dropping silverware, everything has some sort of meaning. Like my grandmother used to tell us, like don't sweep your feet with a broom because you'll never get married. So instantly, I just started sweeping my feet with a broom. And all of those things, all of those superstitions, I put into the book, but I also thought it would be interesting if I created my own versions of things. So if I create my own versions of the stories that I grew up with, I can make them seem like Latinx mythology, but it could still be an entirely new thing. Because at the end of the day, like we don't have Latinx mythology because there's no one Latinx mythology or Hispanic mythology. It's like many different things that come, and it's many different things that come from colonization, from the slavery that was brought over to Latin America. And all of those things make up the superstitions that we all grew up with. And I hope you can see all of that in Labyrinth Lost and in the two books that are going to follow.
Were there any ties between the book and your background, like your personal background history?
Um, okay, so first of all, Labyrinth Lost is about a girl who doesn't want her power, so she tries to cast a curse to get rid of it. And in doing that, she sends herself to another dimension. I think that the inception is maybe like when you're a teenager. I don't know if you guys feel this way, but you always want to send your whole family to another dimension sometimes. And maybe that's a little bit of where that comes from. But other things like little superstitions that the sisters and the grandmothers have, I wanted to have a really strong presence of women, specifically because I was raised in more of a matriarchy, than a patriarchy, and I think that that is really important and preferable. I also think that when I was creating the system of magic, my family doesn't practice anything like that. But the expectation is there, like think that people expect that the magic that I'm writing about is real, but at the same time, like, is the magic that is in Harry Potter, is that real? Probably not. Somebody said yes. But other than those tiny things, I think that the people, like the presence of the aunts, the mother, the grandmother, especially the very angry, sassy grandmother, those were really important. And I think that's where my background really shows. I grew up in Ecuador for 5 years, from like since I was born to age 5. And then after that, we moved to New York. And because we were in like such a different place, the sense of community has to be a lot stronger. And so like my family is very close because of that, I believe.
I actually had a question. It's about how you managed to create your stories. Like, do you plan it? Did you just create it on the fly? Like, what's your go-to to make up a story?
So to make up a story, I outline. A lot of writers will say that there are two kinds of writers. There's pantsers and plotters. And for a long time, I thought like pantsing was like writing without your pants on, but that's not true. It's like writing by the seat of your pants, so that you're just writing whatever comes to mind. And I don't think I can write like that anymore. The very first book that I wrote like that. And I kind of did myself a disservice because the other two books after the first book you already set rules in book 1. So that book was called The Vicious Deep. And I set these rules in book 1. and I didn't plan the other 2 books. So now things have to happen in books 2 and 3, and like timing differences, right? And that put me in a very difficult position where my character couldn't break the rules that I had written in book 1. So that's the reason why I am a very hardcore outliner. Like, I outline my books from chapter 1 to the very end. And that's the writing process that I've chosen for myself. And that's the writing process that I've learned to have, 9 books later.
Is Nova based on someone you know or met?
Nova. So Nova is a character. He's a 17-year-old brujo, and brujo is just the masculine version of bruja, which is witch. He's actually not based on anyone that I know, because he's 17 and he's like covered in tattoos. But I knew like a kid in school that kind of was like him. And so he was sort of created as the exact opposite of my main character, Alex. So everything that Alex is, Nova is the exact opposite, but they still want the exact same things. And so he's kind of like the darker side of her. So I didn't base him on a person. I based him on the idea that I needed to have a character to push Alex into doing the things that she does.
So I guess my follow-up question would be going back towards the mythology, because personally that interests me. It's a high interest of mine considering my cultural background. So if we could go back to that just for a second or two.
Yeah. What is your cultural background?
Mexican.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know. I'm white, but it's okay. So growing up, did you have any type of superstitions within your family or anything that maybe altered your life in any sense, or how you had different perceptions on life, or how you handled different situations?
I don't think that they changed my perception of life. I think that I always felt a little bit strange, just because like my family believed in little weird things and creatures and stories. And I thought that I was the only one, because when I grew up in Queens, I didn't have a large Latinx community. The only Ecuadorian family that we knew was our own, because we all lived in an apartment building, like in different units, but we were all in the same area. And then when we moved to a suburb in Queens, we were still the only Ecuadorian family around, and everyone else was like Guyanese or Jamaican or different parts of the West Indies. And it was still a very, very diverse neighborhood, but I was the only one who had like certain kinds of superstitions. And I already talked about the one with like the silverware and the brooms, and there's also things about like bags and shoes and like getting there's one story. There's this thing called like el mal ojo, right? So like you have the evil eye placed on you by somebody who's jealous of you, or somebody who like wants to do you harm. And my grandmother, like you rub an egg, a raw egg, all over the person's body, and then you crack it into a glass of water, and you're dispelling the evil eye. And then the way you cure it is you have like a girl who has not started menstruating yet walk over the person's body back and forth, and that gets rid of the evil eye. So after a certain point, like I could no longer cure the evil eye, because like, like you get your period and all of a sudden like, oh, you're a woman, congratulations. Yeah. And so that was like the weirdest thing that we ever did, but I could never explain it to any of my friends, because they would just say like, oh, that's weird. But it's one of those things that it makes it very uniquely ours. And then later in life, I discovered that other Latin countries also have the same thing. So I think that we can see how Latinos are connected in very different ways through things that were given to us over the years and over like the periods of colonization and stuff like that.
Right, definitely. Because that's what I related it back to with your death day. I related that to what I would celebrate as Dia de los Muertos. And so my nana and my tatas and everything before they had passed, they were huge people that celebrated it every single year. We didn't go a day without missing a cemetery or just giving thanks back and things like that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to know kind of how your preferences were on that as well.
Yeah, I've always been interested in that holiday because in Ecuador, we celebrate the day after and we make very specific things. So like you obviously go to the cemetery, but you also like make specific foods. Like we have this thing called colada morada, which is an Andean thing. So it's from the Andes. It's like this like purple drink. I don't really know what to explain it. Like it's made out of purple corn and it has different kinds of fruits and it's really sweet. And so I always like I'll go to my mom's house specifically like the first like November 1st. Also it's her birthday, so I have to go. But I know that she's gonna make this one thing, and you make like cheese empanadas and different little foods, and you eat them specifically. Like we don't make pan de muerto, but we make like other kinds of breads, and then there are, like if you go to specific countries in the Andes, not countries, like cities in the Andes, they'll have their own festivals and stuff like that. So I think it's really interesting that the way that we celebrate the dead, and I was always a morbid teenager, so I was really attracted to things like vampires and witches, and this is just like my version of that and putting my own stamp on that.
I'm Liana. Hi.
Hi.
Is there anything else like that stands out, like with you growing up, that you would write about?
Like anything, what else I would write about?
Yeah.
I don't know. I grew up in Queens, and I think Queens is kind of boring because it's mostly like a suburb. But I really, really loved mythology when I was growing up, and the kind of mythology that you're given in school is predominantly Greek and European. So that's what I grew up on. So I loved Percy Jackson and Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings has a lot of Norse mythology. But now, we have the ability to explore other places and other countries and what mythologies look like in other parts of the world, in the different, Asia's like ginormous continent. So like the different countries in different Asian mythologies and the mythology of the West Indies. So I'm constantly reading stuff about that, and searching for other stories. That's not to say that I'm going to tell those stories, but when you read more, I think you get more ideas, and that helps me in my writing.
So I wanted to know, what books are you reading now, and what was your favorite book to read as a child?
So as a child, my favorite book to read was The Witch of Blackbird Pond by Elizabeth George Spear. And it's a book it's set in the Puritan times, and it's about a girl named Kit who comes over from one of the West Indian countries. And she's white, and she's like a colonist, but she, through circumstances, she has to sell all of her stuff and come over to the New World, and she goes to like Connecticut or Massachusetts or one of the colonies, to live with her only living relative. But because she's like a woman traveling by herself, she's also like 16 or 15 or something like that. She's traveling by herself. She can swim, so clearly she's a witch, according to the rules and the customs in that time period. She has her own opinions, and she's very vocal about them. And so she's kind of this like foreign, colorful bird among these, very gray, dull, very religious Puritan people. And she was always ostracized, and she develops a friendship with this woman, this old woman that everyone calls the Witch of Blackbird Pond. And it's about like not fitting into society and not adhering to like societal pressures. And the reason why I really loved that book was because it had a very strong character, and stuff happens at the end. Like, if you haven't read it, you should read it. But I read it every year since I was a little kid. And even though the reason I looked for it was because it had witch in the title, and it ended up not having real witches, because obviously during that time period, they called people witches that they wanted to persecute, and they wanted to take over their property or get rid of them or put them in line. And so that was my favorite book back when I was a kid. And the books that I'm reading now, I read this book called The Bells by Danielle Clayton, and The Bells is it's a fantasy world where everyone is born gray because they're cursed. So like your skin, your hair, your eyes, like everything is just like gray, like you have no color. And there's a group of people called the Bells, and they're essentially witches, and they have powers, and they can transform you, and it's about like the standards of beauty and how beauty can change in different periods and different times, and like you can manipulate it. So these bells kind of have their own like fights to be the favorite of the queen, because like the royals can control who gets to be beautiful. And so it's kind of like Scott Westerfeld's The Uglies meets like Marie Antoinette's court, which it's like they're very different, but it's very, very cool. So that's a book I read recently. There's a book called Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, which came out this past week, and it's West African mythology and this world where this like this group of people, they're persecuted in this land, and their power has been taken away, and now they're trying to get their magic back, and by getting their magic back, they're rebelling against like the royal family. So I just really like books about magic and rebellion.
My name is Genna, and I was wondering how you see Nova fitting into future novels.
Nova is going to be in book 2 in Bruja Born. And Bruja Born comes out in June. So Nova's coming back. He needs to do a lot better because he was not a good person in book 1. So he's getting like an opportunity to do that, an opportunity to help. And so one of the characters, Lula, she's going to ask him like, you can either step up or you can do what you always do and run away. And so he gets the opportunity to figure out if that's the kind of person that he wants to be. Ideally, I would like to give him his own story and his own novel, but I don't know. We'll see if my publisher wants to, give that a shot. I'll probably do it anyway, but it wouldn't happen until after the 3rd book comes out. So it would probably be book number 4.
Yeah, a couple of us were actually talking about, if Nova was actually going to get his own book. So yes.
Well, good. I'm glad that there's some Nova love.
Okay, so I'm Angel. And do you think it's important for people to read books and read poetry through different lenses as well as
Seeing
just
other
their
stories?
custom, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to, there's a saying, decolonize the classics, because like every single classic novel and poet that you read is like a dead white old man. Right. No offense to the living old white men, but
some of us plan on being dead.
You're like, I can't help it. So it because they're not given to us in most curriculums, you have to go out and search for them yourselves. So there are different outlets for that. There's an organization called We Need Diverse Books. There's a website called Latinx and Kid Lit. They're going to be outlets for We Need Diverse Books actually has an app where you can search for book recommendations. And it's always going to be stories about people that are marginalized, because not only do we have like a lack of books by people of color, we also have a lack of books by people that are queer, by people who are disabled, by people who live in other marginalizations. And I think that when we have to be able to see more than one experience in the same story that we've always been told. And for me, like, my contribution is going to be like, here's a story about a little Latina from Brooklyn with magic, and she can be just like everybody else. And if you can read books by F. Scott Fitzgerald and the classics that are given to us, like if you can read about these people and you can be told that you can identify with any of these characters, why can't somebody else read a book by me and not identify with the characters that I write. You know what I mean? So like the way that we battle that is by reading books by other people and by people of different marginalizations. And there are plenty of books out there, you know. So if somebody says like these, you know, Latinos don't write books, or you know, Black people don't write books, or Indian people don't write books, yes, we do. They're out there, and they're different gazes. You just have to be able to find it, and you have to be able to know. Until we can get those books into the curriculums, then we have to find them ourselves.
Definitely. Because, well, I know here in Tucson, I can't speak for other places around the country, but I know specifically at our school, we offer studies where it's Mexican American history, but from a Mexican point of view, or from African American point of view. And there's classes that people can take, and it's a huge push for people, especially locals who have been here and family members that have been here for generations and have seen the town and the city grow from such pretty much a marginalized little place to something big and colorful. And I would honestly consider our city to be a pretty open environment for people. And I love that our high school offers those classes for people, because it is important for people to see things through different lenses as well, and not just based off one curriculum. I definitely think it helps evolve mindsets to a better generation on where we're living.
Yeah, and I think that it helps close the divide, right? Like if you learn about other people, like you won't mysticize them and you won't treat them like an other, because you'll have more information. And so that's really important.
Okay, so what do you do, like when you're writing? What do you do to relax yourself to
I've
start
never
the
relaxed.
process? I understand that.
The reason why I've never relaxed is because I drink a literal pot of coffee throughout the day. Like when it's over, I'm a little sad, but then I know I can't sleep if I keep drinking it. To get myself to start writing, when you write, I write full time. I didn't used to always write full time. I used to have another job. Now I have many jobs because I write books, but I also freelance write. So I write articles through the website, different websites, Barnes and Nobles. And so I'm always working. It's not, I can stay home and do it. So if I don't give myself a schedule and a discipline, I'm not a disciplined person. So it's very hard to like give yourself a discipline, so that you can start off and be productive, because otherwise I'll just like roll over when I wake up, check my Instagram, and then like lose an hour because you're just scrolling, and you know, check like all of my social medias. And I have to get out of the habit of doing that. So like I set a lot of alarms, but I don't put like angry alarms, because that just makes me more tense. You know, like I'll put like a song that I like, and like I'll set like reminders. So when I actually sit down to start writing, I make sure that I always eat, and I prepare myself as if I'm going to work outside. So, you know, I wash my face, I like put on some lip gloss, and whatever helps, you know. And then I sit down, I make sure that my writing space is mine and feels comfortable. So I have a lot of little trinkets that give me good luck, or like that I feel they're lucky. So I have like a lot of like crystals and stones and like little Funko Pops from like Star Wars and stuff like that. And whatever makes, you know, like whatever. My mom saw my little trinkets and stuff on my desk, and she was like, well, I guess Garcia Marquez had his yellow flowers, so you can have your weird Funko Pops. You know, and whatever works for you as a writer. So I make sure that I'm comfortable in my space, that tension never goes away. And then I have my outline, and I start writing. And if I'm not feeling it, then I go for a walk, I do an errand, I go grocery shopping, or like go to the bank, and, you know, all those like boring adult stuff. And take a walk around the block, and then I'll come back and I sit back down, and I do 30-minute time sprints. And then, so I have this app called the Forest app, and you grow a tree, and if you leave the app, your tree dies. So
Okay.
yeah, and so that motivates me. I have a friend who's like, I don't care if the tree dies, so he doesn't use it because it won't motivate him. But for me, I'm like a sucker, so I'm like, this poor animated not real tree is gonna die if I leave my application. And so I use that to set a timer. So 30 minutes, I'll write for 30 minutes, and then I'll take a 10-minute break and go online and do my things. That way I don't lose so much time on the internet. I just like give myself breaks. Or when it comes down to lunchtime, I'll make lunch and I'll have my TV show. I'll go on Netflix and watch like Supernatural or whatever. Something that I've already seen so that I know I'm not going to get sucked into it. And like lose 13 hours on Netflix. Yes, I'm still watching Netflix. And so I think that's how I have to coordinate my day. And I have to like treat it like business, because it is business, you know. It's an art form, but at the same time you're still working and you still have deadlines, and there are still people waiting for you to turn things in.
Right.
Like right now I'm like 3 weeks late on a project.
Oh.
But I mean, they know it's coming. So I have to like figure out what works for you when you're writing. Every single writer is going to have a completely different process. I have a friend who he doesn't outline, and I'm just like, bro, how do you even? Because I wouldn't even know. I would lose myself, and I would just, you know, go nuts if I didn't have like a map that was leading me to my story. Mm-hmm. Maybe one day I'll write a book without an outline again. But that will probably be in the future, where I'm just like, I need to take a year off and do other things.
Can we talk about the second book for a little?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so in the first book, you made Alex the main character.
Yeah.
What made you want to make Lula the main character in the second book?
The reason why that happened was book 1 was sold as a 1-book deal, so it wasn't sold as a series. After book 1 was going to come out, and then the reviews were like, this doesn't suck. The reviews were really positive. So my publisher decided to buy 2 more books right away. And I said, I want to give Alex her happy ending. Like the thing that happens with her and Rishi, like, because I don't want to give spoilers. But like, so like, I want to give her satisfying ending. I don't want to like come book 2 and be like, everybody dies at page 1 and now she has to start over. So I didn't want to do that. Like, I mean, terrible things are still going to happen in book 2, I'm going to make terrible things happen to my characters in book 2. But it's more, I want to see it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. So there are 3 sisters. There are going to be 3 books and maybe Nova. And I think that's a structure that I haven't seen in young adult books in a long time. So everyone can have their own story. And every story can be different because they're 3 completely different women. They're 3 completely different young women. And I don't know. I think it's just a cooler structure than having like, there's still a unifying thread, and most of them, like, they're gonna take. There's an 8-month difference between book 1 and book 2, and between book 2 and book 3, there's gonna be a 6-month period where like it's like 6 months later.
So I'm going back to Nova because that was my theme. So
I love it.
in the book, Nova and Alex's relationship was off and on. Where does the relationship stand?
Well, it wasn't really off and on. I think that Alex was like attracted to Nova because obviously he's cute, and he's a little dangerous, and he's like the bad boy. But she also can't fix him, and she shouldn't. So she doesn't love him, you know. And I think that Nova needs to find somebody independent from Alex. Like, Alex and Nova are 2 alike. They're both characters that are a little bit broken in different ways, and they have like past sadnesses with like their dads and their families. And so I think Nova needs to find somebody who isn't exactly like him. And like, because you can't be with somebody that makes you feel bad about yourself. You know what I mean? And so, because that's not a healthy relationship, and I don't think I would encourage that. And so as Nova becomes his own person and like a whole person, then I think he would be ready to be with somebody else and like find somebody that's right for him.
Of all the characters you have in your book, who do you see yourself most in?
There's a character you're going to meet in Bruja Born named Marty McKay, and he's a shapeshifter. I'm not a shapeshifter, but but he tells a lot of like corny jokes, and I think that would be me.
I have a feeling that'd be me too.
So he's an ally in the series, and he was in my first series, The Vicious Deep. And he's just sort of goofy and the comic relief. He doesn't really take himself too seriously, and I've always like made it a point that I'm just like, no matter how many books I have, no matter like what kind of success that I have, I want to be able to just like tell jokes and not take myself too seriously and like have fun. And Marty is that person in that book, you know. But I think that like I gave Lula curly hair because I have curly hair, so yeah. there's also that. Do you guys have any last questions before?
I have one last question.
Okay.
So overall, for any future journalists or any future authors, or maybe current ones who are studying, maybe struggling to find their motivation to keep doing what they love, do you have any advice for those people?
I think that for future writers out there, the main thing is to look at the world around you, and if you have something to contribute that doesn't already exist, or maybe it does exist but it's told from a point of view that isn't yours, and if you can add to that discussion, then I think that you should pursue that journey. I think that it's important to have an array of voices in books, in journalism, and I think that we have to be very honest about the kinds of stories that we tell, and we have to build community in a lot of different ways, and we have to build community in stronger ways. So for me, art builds communities, and art brings people together, and I think that that's what books do specifically. And you see that in book clubs, you see that in libraries, you see that in the Tucson Festival of Books, where there are tons and tons of people walking around for this one thing. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it's stories that change us and shape us in how we are. Like, there's an entire generation that grew up on Harry Potter and the Hunger Games and Star Wars, and those kids like have that spark of rebellion in them and like resistance. So, you know, I have a lot of aspirations and hope for future writers, and hopefully like everyone finds their voice. And I think that the main thing is like, don't let anyone tell you that your voice isn't important, because it is.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.